Two.
Good evening, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Jay Wagner. For anyone who's listening, I'm calling to order our special meeting for May 1st. There are 5 council members present here at City Hall, Britt Moore, Wesley Hudson, Victor Jones, and Cyril Jefferson, and I'm also present. That constitutes a quorum, and we're going to call our meeting to order and proceed. The first item is to recognize our staff and our manager to discuss our proposed budget for fiscal year 23-24.
Mayor, members of council, we have our FY 2023-2024 proposed budget that we are prepared to present to you tonight. The budget that you'll have before you allows us to meet all of our operational goals that council has established. It maintains our current tax rate, and we're also able to continue some of our capital projects associated with key projects in downtown, most notably those dealing with the additional parking that's needed for downtown, and also 300 Oak. We'll continue to move forward with our senior center project. The pace of some of those projects could be impacted. We have to continue to have some conversations, and that's based on the discussion that we've had with Davenport, our financial advisor. They came in and talked to us about the number of capital projects that we have coming online in the next 4 to 5 years and what we need to do to help prepare for that. We are planning to close on a property associated with the construction of a new city hall. Closing on that property is supposed to happen in the fall of this year. So we still have some time to plan for that, but this budget does not take into account the additional debt that the city would need to take on to support that project. So those would have to be future conversations that we would have. But I'm happy to say that we've been able to maintain our current staff and keep up with the pay increases that have been needed. This is a fast-moving market in terms of what's happening with some of our neighboring jurisdictions. So while I can't say that some additional modifications might not be needed as we get into the latter part of this year, as other jurisdictions are making changes, I do feel comfortable that we've made the changes that we're aware of to date, and those costs are included in the budget. So with that, I'll ask our budget and performance manager if he'll move forward and give you all the presentation. And we'll also have an abbreviated presentation that's part of our regular meeting that starts at 5:30. So with that, I'll ask Stephen if he will start the presentation.
Yes, and thank you, and good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. We're going to present to you a little bit in the weeds on the FY 23-24 proposed budget. The budget is balanced in accordance with North Carolina general statutes. An official copy has been filed with the city clerk's office. Tomorrow morning, a copy will be available for public inspection in the library. Some point this evening, we'll have it up on our city website, and hard copies are at your spots up there. Before going into the budget overview, just to talk about some additional challenges we face when developing this budget. Obviously, employee salaries, recruitment and retention have kind of continued on from last year, and also inflation has continued on. Homeowners have been seeing it at home. Our city departments are also seeing it. The cost of doing business and providing the same level of services has just gone up. The presentation is going to talk about the total budget, revenues and expenditures. We're going to deep dive a little bit into the general fund and then some of the city's major enterprise funds, specifically water, sewer, electric, and solid waste. And there'll also be a brief kind of overview of our capital improvement plan, and then we'll talk about next steps or the budget calendar. And so the total budget proposed for FY 2023-24 is a little over $478.5 million. This pie chart just shows the breakdown by fund. The general fund at $142.1 million is the largest fund of the entire budget, just under 30%. Electric is next closest at $135.3 million, but I will note that $90 million of electric's budget is just the purchase of wholesale power costs. You can kind of go around the loop and see all the different amounts, which are in millions, and also the percentages. And I'll note that water sewer is the only other fund that is over 10% of the total budget at just under 14%. This is a snapshot of revenues by category, and we'll have a similar chart for expenditures, kind of showing fund balance, property taxes, sales and use taxes, intergovernmental revenues, licenses and permits, charges for service, miscellaneous revenues, and reimbursements transfers. And you see the adopted current year's budget, the proposed 24 budget, the amount change, and the percent change. And we're going to give a little bit of detail in the following slides of what's driving the change in some of these. But you'll see the total budget is an increase of just over $14.2 million, or 3.1%. So as the manager alluded to, the tax rate remains at 61.75 cents per $100 of valuation. The budget includes no increase to electric rates. There's a proposed 4% increase in water sewer rates. In addition, there are proposed fee changes to several areas. In Parks and Recreation, it's not necessarily a fee change, but a clarification of a fee. Currently, if you are a resident or a non-resident and you rent swimming pool lanes for competition, you can rent 8 lanes. We are clarifying that where you can only rent 6 lanes, which would leave 2 available for public use during competitions. Customer service fees, these are mostly after-hours fees, extra trip fees, if there's a meter tampering or investigation, kind of if someone's messing with some of the fees, costs for staff to go out there and take a look at what's going on. In parking, the daily maximum is increasing, as well as monthly spaces. Currently, there's a flat rate for renting monthly spaces. It moves to a tiered rate, so the more spaces you rent, the lower your rate would be. Solid waste fees have several increases. The solid waste availability fee is increasing from $14 to $15 per month. There's also increases for a red box rental. It's kind of like a big dumpster for large disposal projects, and also the cost of carts. If you're a new resident and you purchase a cart, that cost has gone up for our solid waste division, and so we just increased that to make up our cost recovery. And lastly, there's a proposed increase to the stormwater fee, going from $4 to $5 per ERU, or equivalent residential unit. Diving into some of the details of the revenue categories, property taxes are increasing $3.72 million. A penny on the tax rate will bring in about $1,339,000. This is about $64,000 more than what a penny brings in the current year. And the overall valuation is about $13.5 billion, and this is a 2.2% increase over last year. The table there shows the breakdown of the allocation of the property tax rate. 58.35 cents go to the general fund, and 3.4 cents to the debt service fund, and the proposed budget does not change this. Just one final note on the valuation. We are in 4 counties. Guilford County's valuation is about 94% of the tax base, and that is projected to go up about 1.8%. On sales and use tax, one, I'll use the word benefit, but maybe not the right words to you, but with things costing more, we get more sales tax, and so we've seen very large growth over the past couple of years. So our projections are currently have us finishing the year 10% above where we finished last year, which is an additional $2.73 million. Our projections for next year are to be 4.5% above that projected year end. The League of Municipalities puts out a revenue report. Their year-end estimates were higher than that 10% and higher than that 4.5%, but we do want to be conservative and realistic, and if they do slow down, because we don't know how long this boom is going to last, we want to be able to absorb that without much of a hit to our revenues. And lastly, occupancy taxes increased $696,000, and this is based more on the higher room night costs as opposed to more room nights being rented out. For intergovernmental revenue, you'll see in that chart earlier, it was about $8 million, or 40%. This is almost entirely due to additional capital grants that we've programmed. There's 2 NCDOT capital grants totaling a little over $2 million. That's just the federal portion that we budgeted in the general capitals fund. In the transit capital funds, a little over $2.09 million. And then there's one $5 million stormwater federal grant for West Green Drive. And so that drives almost our entire intergovernmental revenue increase. In charges for service, this is mostly our enterprise funds. And so water sewer, with that proposed rate increase, that is going to drive a lot of that increase. Central services funds are kind of internal service funds, replacement of equipment, our fleet vehicles, fleet services charges departments. And so if we increase number of vehicles replacing, then departments are going to pay a little bit more, and that's where that increase is driven by. And lastly, fund balance was decreasing $7.8 million. This is kind of an accounting swap in how we account for our capital projects. Electric is down $3.5 million, which is solely due to capital, and also the solid waste post-closure fund, down $4.12 million. There were just some large capital projects that fund balance covered last year. They've either fallen off or covered via a transfer from the fund. And so it's still coming out of the enterprise funds. It's just kind of an accounting of how we do those types of projects. Moving on to the expenditure side, we break it down between personnel, which is about 33% of the total budget, operating, which is about 38% of the budget, and then the other categories you see there. And again, we're going to go into a little bit more detail in the ongoing slides. I'll just note on reimbursements, that's kind of our indirect costs for some of our functions like HR or finance to some of the enterprise funds. So on personnel services, going up $5.61 million year over year. That includes some salary changes that were done in the current year. Every year, Human Resources conducts what we call a one-third study, where they study one-third of our positions, looking at their classification and compensation. And so that was done this past year, and changes were implemented in September, and it included police, and there were some substantial increases to keep up with the market. And so those were added in September and are increasing our base budget for next year to the tune of $1.37 million. Proposed salary changes for FY 23-24, keeping with the 3% mid-year merit pay adjustment. Another increase to the employer contribution to the local government employees retirement system. This is a 0.75% increase for general employees and a 1% increase for law enforcement. We have to pay this. This comes from Elders for their actuarial studies. It's been going up fairly significantly year over year and has been a driver probably the past 4 to 6 budgets. We think next year might be kind of a flattening before further increases, but we're in talks with the League of Municipalities and other folks at the state to see, is this ever going to stop, or are we going to continue to see these, over $1 million impacts to something that doesn't change effectively how much retirement is provided to employees. It's just an impact to the city's budget. Increased costs for workers' compensation. We've just had some high claims over the past year, and this is just keeping up our budget with where that trend has gone. And then increased employer costs to the city health plan. There's no increase to what employees contribute, and that's driving about $421,000 of that total personnel increase. Diving a little deeper into some changes to employee benefits. For employee health benefits, the transition from fully insured to self-insured. Back in 2016, a health insurance fund was established with the ultimate goal of becoming self-insured. And in talking with our consultants, there was always kind of an amount of reserves we needed to reach that point. We are at that point. The health fund reserves have grown since 2016, and we're in a position where we can make this transition for next year. In addition, the implementation of a full-service employee health clinic. This would expand the health and wellness options available to employees. The goal would be to lower healthcare costs, maximize our employee health, and by maximizing employee health and transitioning to self-insured, then the benefits of having healthier employees will be realized entirely by the city, as opposed to having a contract for a fully insured plan as opposed to self-insured. And lastly, the creation of a paid 6-week parental leave / family caregiver policy. On the position front, the budget includes the addition of 3 new full-time positions and 6 position reclassifications. For the position adds, an assistant recreation supervisor in Parks and Recreation. This is to be located at City Lake Park. With the new event center and the renovations there, there's a need for just an additional employee to help with the additional programming and capacity needs at that facility. 2 new positions in the electric fund, a utility locator. There's currently 1 utility locator, and so if there are more utility locates than that position can handle, they're pulling someone off one of the crews. Electric would rather keep that person dedicated to working on the crew and have a second utility locator. The $102,000 does include a vehicle, and so that's why that cost is over $100,000. And lastly, for electric, a power line technician. Our energy infrastructure has grown, and this is just to keep up with the growing demand. For the position reclassifications, all 6 are in the general funds, and those dollar amounts are net. Reclassification of an existing position to budget and performance director. A new telecommunicator in information technology, and for this position, 2 vacant part-time positions will be eliminated to help alleviate some of the costs. In police, reclassifying a vacant position to a firearms and tool mark examiner, and that cost will also include a vehicle, which is driving a lot of that $75,000. In Parks and Recreation, a marketing coordinator. This is an existing position that works about 30 hours a week. It's converting to 40 hours a week. Parks and Recreation has the demand for more marketing outreach, and so it also acts as retention for this employee. They're working 30 hours a week, but getting to 40 hours a week will hopefully keep them here with the city. Similar on the library outreach coordinator. This person helps out with the bookmobile. They're working 30 hours a week. It would convert this position from 30 hours to 40 hours a week. Those two positions are already having benefits paid on them, and so the vast majority of the increase is just net salary. And lastly, a reclassification of a vacant position within transportation to have an assistant transportation director position. Moving on to operating. Operating year over year is increased $1.52 million. However, there's a $5 million decrease for wholesale power costs, and this is based on what we've been paying over the past few years. Looking at the types of increases, our fleet charges, vehicle and rolling stock replacement. Fleet services has had that increase in charges for service on the revenue side. Well, this is the other end of that. This is what departments are paying into that replacement program. Inflationary increases, we've kind of grouped them together, totaling over $2.76 million. This is supplies, chemicals, professional services. As I mentioned earlier, the cost of doing business is just going up for almost all of our service areas. Information technology investments, this is ranging from hardware and software, about $941,000. The occupancy tax pass-through, I note in the revenues that this is going up. We pass through those funds to Visit High Point and Market Authority, and so this is the expense side of that transaction. And lastly, economic development incentives. We base this just based on where economic development believes our existing incentive payments are going to happen, and so we're just increasing that to keep up with when some expected incentive payments are meant to come through. Capital and capital outlay, increased $5.32 million. Increased fire apparatus replacement costs. The cost of an engine is going up about $130,000, and that's hopefully the high end of that estimate. There's some talks that it could be even higher. We are replacing one engine in next year's budget, which keeps with fire's replacement schedule. And then additional fleet and rolling stock replacement. So this is an increase $403,000. The budget is $4.7 million for vehicle replacements and rolling stock replacements. $9.7 million is the amount that met the replacement criteria, but replacing what's the highest priority in discussions with fleet services for that. Lastly, on the capital, and this is more of your infrastructure capital, general capital's increased $1.6 million. Stormwater increased $5.75 million. Again, $5 million of that is a federal grant for a West Green Drive project. Water sewer PAYGO up slightly over $1 million, and transit up about $2.27 million. Moving on to the general fund. Again, no change to the property tax rate or the allocation to the property tax rate. The fee schedule changed for Parks and Recreation that I touched on earlier. Sales and use taxes, the majority of our sales and use taxes are budgeted in the general fund, and so following the same kind of idea that we talked about with the total budget. Licenses and permits revenue has increased $329,000. This is mainly due to building permit activity. Our charges for service, mostly in Parks and Recreation, increased $455,000. This is at the campground, our golf courses. It's just more people are using this, and so our user fees are going up. And then miscellaneous revenue has increased about $585,000, and this is driven primarily by investment income. Personnel increases in the general fund total $4.76 million. This bullet about increases due to market pressures, that's that 1/3 study that was implemented back in September. And so the general fund impact of that is $1.05 million. And then one new position, the Parks and Rec position, and the 6 reclassifications touched on earlier. The table is just a breakdown that kind of gets you to not the entire increase, but the big drivers of that. So the 1/3 study, $1.05 million. The 3% merit, about $1.4 million. The increased Eldridge contribution, $949,000. Increased healthcare costs on the city side, $379,000. And then those last two, increased workers' comp and the new position and reclassified positions. On the operating and capital outlay, they are up for the general fund about $1.9 million. The The pass-through for Visit High Point from those increased occupancy tax revenues is about $571,000. Charges for additional vehicle replacements, $510,000. Just phone and utility budgets increasing $133,000. I touched on the increases in IT infrastructure. Some of that is computer software licenses. A lot of this is existing programming and applications. Just our license fees have gone up, and they cover a wide variety of city services and city departments, and so you cobble those all together, and that's where a lot of that increase is. And then the fire apparatus replacement just increasing. Debt service in the general fund, a new body-worn camera contract, budgeted slightly over $460,000, and then some information technology equipment, about $260,000. And lastly, talk about interfund transfers out. This is just kind of local funds out of the general fund that help cover capital or other areas. General capital increased $1.132 million. And then a transfer to the general bond projects fund of $600,000. This is the first payment of the repayment of the interfund loan that was approved for partially funding the City Lake Park improvements.
Steve, and that body-worn camera contract, that's the one that we're voting on tonight, correct?
Yes, sir. Touching quickly on the enterprise funds, water sewer, as I mentioned, a proposed water sewer rate increase of 4%. This will help fund increased costs for personnel. Operating supplies and chemicals are drastically increasing. Capital infrastructure needs of the aging system as well. There is no appropriation of water sewer reserves, and pay-go capital for water sewer totals just under $11 million. In the electric fund, no proposed changes to electric rates. I mentioned those customer service fee changes. The addition of the 2 positions, the utility locator and the power line technician. Wholesale power costs of $90 million, and pay-go capital totaling $9.85 million. And lastly, on the enterprise fund front, solid waste, fee changes, an additional $1 per month for the solid waste availability fee, increases to garbage, yard waste, and recycling container costs, and the red box rental. And again, those last 2 are really just to help recover the costs that the department is seeing on their end for those services. Operating increases, vehicle replacement costs, vehicle repairs, new sampling requirements, and then pay-go capital projects totaling $1.021 million. And lastly, on the capital improvement plan, the full list of proposed projects is at the end of this presentation. This presentation will be emailed out to you all after the 2 meetings tonight. But the proposed projects by fund, general capital, $5.689,595. I'll note that just under $3 million of that is local dollars, and the remaining is federal grants. Water, sewer, electric, transit. The transit, $382,000 of that $3.77 million is local dollars. The other are state and federal grants. Solid waste, and then stormwater, $7.1 million, and again, $5 million of that is a federal grant. And so next steps, this is our calendar as currently set. A work session next Wednesday, May the 10th, from 3 to 5 p.m. Tonight, we will ask you to approve the schedule, which will include scheduling the public hearing for the Monday, May 15th council meeting. Thursday, May 18th, a work session, again from 3 to 5 p.m. And at that meeting, representatives from Visit High Point and the Market Authority will be here to present on their budgets as they do annually. And then we've scheduled tentatively Wednesday, May 24th as an if necessary. And before I conclude and get to questions, I do want to take a moment to just introduce the budget and evaluation staff, Rosalind McNeil, one of our budget analysts, and then Don Scales, our other budget analysts. And so we would not be able to get this done without their work, so I applaud them for putting in the long hours these last few weeks and months.
Thank you.
And at this time, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Floor is open for questions.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Stephen, in terms of staffing and manpower across the organization, where are we to plan in terms of open positions, filling the positions, competitiveness on our rates versus other municipalities, and filling positions to plan? Are we staffed at appropriate levels?
Well, we'll speak with HR and get you exactly where we compare, but I would say similar to other jurisdictions, we're nowhere near where we have been in the past, I think.
I can provide some information for you, Councilmember. We have, typically, we run anywhere between a 5 to 8% vacancy rate in the organization. That's typically been where we are. Right now, we're trending around 11 to 12%, and it depends on which departments you are looking in. If you're looking at police and fire, those are departments that are typically running around 12%. And if you isolate just for sworn positions, you're still around 11% vacancies. I think it's 35 or 36 vacancies the last time I looked at the chart, and that could change in a day. Some other areas where we're seeing vacancies is actually in engineering, in terms of finding engineers, but we're making some good strides there where we've been able to bring in some staff. And we also are having some challenges as it relates to Parks and Recreation. And a lot of that is seasonal as we're bringing in employees for the summer and during pool season. But we are, that 11 to 12% vacancy rate is where we are, but that's not uncommon with where other organizations are sitting. It's just been very difficult right now. I do think that as we're moving forward, we have to think about specific positions and specific skill sets. For instance, individuals with CDLs. We realize that we're going to have to do something a little bit differently to be able to get people in the door that have the CDL qualifications. And we're working with Guilford Tech on some options and some programs there. So we're trying to think about how we're doing things differently, whether or not we need to start paying for those CDLs in some respects to make sure that we have the people that we need. But once we get them here, it's also about how we're going to make sure that we can keep them and maintain those employees as part of our workforce.
Well, I think if we're talking about paying for credentials, then obviously we'd have to do some type of contract, to make sure that we don't pay for somebody's credentials and then they turn around and take a higher paying job. So, but that type of thinking is probably where we have to go in order to meet our staffing levels. Because if it's just on salary alone and benefits, it's going to be difficult for us to not be competitive and not have that revenue to spend on staffing. So whatever creative way we can do to get to fill these positions, we should definitely look at it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So last year, we had a 3-cent reduction in our property tax rate, correct?
We did.
And as we stand in this budget right now, we are 1.5 cents per 100 lower than Greensboro in our property tax rate, and 1.85 cents per 100 lower than Winston-Salem in our property tax rate. So with all of the work that's happening in High Point right now, we still have the lowest property tax rate between High Point, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem. Correct?
Right.
I think that's front page news. So, Pat, I hope you're listening. I think that's fantastic news. Thank you all for your work.
Anyone else with questions for staff? All right. Thank you, sir.
This evening, there'll be a much abbreviated version of the similar presentation.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next items are all closed session items. So I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session. I believe it's for purposes of economic development, attorney-client privilege, and maybe a property issue regarding real property as well.
Motion. Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes. We're now in closed session, so.